Good afternoon. Welcome to the March 25th, 2024 meeting of the Yakima School Board. We appreciate your presence here. We know that we have some very important things to discuss today that have severe impact on people's lives, so we appreciate your presence here. Before we call the meeting to order, I need to remind you we offer Spanish interpretation services from Jorge with Language Connection. If you need translation assistance in person, please check with Jorge for a device. And Jorge, please translate that information.
Good afternoon. Jorge Villaseñor, Language Connection. Si alguien necesita de la ayuda de un intérprete, tenemos los radios aquí. Los podemos hacer disponibles. Gracias.
Gracias por tu ayuda. We provide live streaming for this meeting. The link can be found on our webpage under Board of Directors or by going directly to www.ysd7.org/board meetings. If you wish to make a public comment this afternoon, there are two options available for you. The first option is for commenting on agenda items only, and the second option, which comes toward the end of the meeting, is for all other topics. In order to speak, you will need to sign two forms, a sign-in form and the guidelines form, and those forms are available as you enter the door. If you're interested in watching past meetings, you can find them on our webpage's YSD YouTube channel. Now, Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett,
Here.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Present.
Director Rice,
Here.
Vice President Villanueva,
Here.
President Walker.
Here. Now, will you all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? And I think March's character word is a real timely word for the challenges we have before us. And the word for March is grace, the quality or state of being considerate or thoughtful, disposition to or an active instance of kindness, courtesy, or clemency. En español, cortés, la cualidad de ser considerado o reflexivo, disposición a realizar un acto de bondad, cortesía o clemencia. And now we have our Yakima land acknowledgement presented by numerous Yakima students.
Today, the schools of the Yakima School District rest on the ancestral lands of the 14 confederated tribes and bands of the Yakima Nation.
Hoy las escuelas del Distrito Escolar de Yakima descansan en las tierras ancestrales de las 14 tribus y bandas confederadas de la nación Yakima.
The people of the Yakima Nation inhabited more than 12 million acres.
La gente de la nación Yakima habitó más de 10 billones de acres.
Across Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Franklin, Grant, Kittitas, Klickitat, and Yakima counties.
En los condados de Adams, Benton, Chelan, Douglas, Grant, Franklin, Kittitas, Klickitat, y Yakima.
Today we honor those native peoples who are tied to the land through history, legends, and culture.
Hoy honramos a estos pueblos originales que están vinculados en la tierra a través de historias, leyendas y culturas. We acknowledge the descendants who live in the world today.
Reconocemos a sus descendientes que viven en el mundo de hoy.
We thank the caretakers of this land who have lived here and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Agradezcamos a los guardianes de la tierra, quienes han vivido aquí y continúan viviendo aquí desde tiempos inmemoriales.
An acknowledgement is a simple, powerful way to show respect.
Un reconocimiento es una manera simple y poderosa de mostrar respeto.
And a step toward correcting the stories and practices that erase indigenous peoples' history and culture.
Y un paso hacia la corrección de las historias y prácticas que borran la historia y la cultura de los pueblos indígenas.
It also honors the truth. También honra la verdad.
As a school district, we will continue to build upon our relations with the Yakima Nation.
Como distrito escolar, continuaremos fortaleciendo nuestras relaciones con la nación Yakima.
Thank you, students. Now it's always a sad moment. We lost a student recently. Rogelio Uriel, or Uri, Benitez Mendez, was a 14-year-old student formerly of Washington Middle School and recently enrolled in Yakima Online. And within the last couple of weeks, Uri passed away at Cottage in the Meadow. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor the memory of our student. Thank you. And there is a link in the web presentation of the agenda. There is a link to a short obituary regarding Yuri. Next up, we have reports to the board. And first up, we have President of the YEA, Mr. John Kavanaugh.
Welcome. Yep, agree. Today, John Kavanaugh, YEA President, then me, Jeff DeWitt, who also going to speak. He's our bargaining chair. First, I would like to thank the Yakima community for supporting the levy February 13th, because without that, the cuts that are going to happen today, that they're talking about here, would be that are catastrophic, would be much worse. Thank you for passing the levy. A lot of YA members, school employees, admin, everything did a lot of work in getting that levy passed. As a school board, under government policy, you have one employee, the superintendent. And you must think he's doing an incredible job. In the past 5 years, you have given him raises of over 33%, making him the 6th highest paid superintendent in the state. Since 2019-20, you have increased his compensation package from $252,000 to $374,000 in 2022-23. If you put in the cost of living for this year, that would bounce up to $388,000. But you've given him almost 8% per year. So it could definitely be more. Which goes much farther in Yakima than the other 5 superintendents that are on the west side that make home. That's quite a bit more than the governor. As employees working directly with the students, we have not seen raises, anything like that, in the past 5 years. You know, 1% above cost of living, 0.5% above cost of living. Last summer, when the budget crisis came to light for the district, one of the first things the superintendent asked me was if YEA was going to freeze their raises in our current contract, and then repeated that in several other meetings. Just let's see that sink in. As the elected leaders and the superintendent of the district, how do you justify these raises when we're talking about this today? I'd like you to think about that as you, board president and superintendent agree, flying to New Orleans in a week and a half to the National School Board National Conference to accept award that costs about $7,500. Not a good time to be going on trips when we're talking about staff reductions. Under your watch, as the school board, of which 4 of the 5 you've been here at least 5 years, we have gone through a pandemic that created unbelievable challenges for which YEA, the other bargaining units, and the district leadership work together to support the education of our students. We received over roughly $87.5 million additional funding and federal ESSER funds, which helped us catch up on a huge amount of maintenance that I know needed to be done. We purchased a lot of technology and had to incorporate technology, learn how to teach in a different way, several different times, between hybrid learning, online learning, and as we went through it, and the funds were definitely appreciated. So we went through a time when we had all this money. But also, we purchased buildings, one on 49th, an office building, one on First Street, that now we have got to take care of, that we had staff that were all hired to go into these buildings, and now those staffs are being reduced. Do we need those buildings? In the same time, since 2018, 2019, central administration costs for personnel since 2018-19 have gone from $12 million to $18 million. They've increased 46%. Okay. It's been pretty predictable. We looked at all the birth rates in Yakima County across the state that we have been in a declining birth rate since 2011. So it's been pretty predictable that, you know what, we're going to need less employees, and we've done exactly the opposite and greatly increased the number of employees in the Yakima School District. I believe that, we're going to see a presentation from Mr. Cooper here in a few minutes that's going to display the cuts that need to be made and where he thinks to get us budgetary where we need to be. And next year, I want to know who's going to be held accountable for all the spending, all the stuff that's happened inside, and that we did not see this coming, or you did not see this coming in the district. Okay. No, that's good.
Over the past 5 years, we've been through a lot together. When Dr. Green's administration began, he inherited a civility report that showed an incredible disconnect between our district administration and our teaching staff. It was through this collective effort from YEA and YSD admin that we were able to begin to mend that relationship. We took great strides over that time in creating MOUs to address the online teaching environment and the classroom safety for our teachers and students while working through that pandemic. As John mentioned, the pandemic also brought in an influx of federal funds that were much needed as a lifeline to help our district weather the storm and emerge from it in a positive place. These funds should have put us in a position to continue tackling the learning loss and emotional needs that we see in our students every day, still at this point, and will for many more years. That support came from the federal government to the tune of $87 million. Also, during that time, YEA was routinely told by our school district that we were in financial trouble. Each year, there were threats of being anywhere from $3 to $5 million in the red, only to find out each year that we had a surplus. Spending grew, and so did our fund balance. We have been told of a $20 million deficit now. Yakima School District will be laying off teachers, paraeducators, and building administrators. Those closest to the students are paying the price for administrative spending decisions. We all see the newly purchased and remodeled buildings, the new curriculum bought and implemented, and the many maintenance projects completed. And I can't even begin to wrap my head around the cost of travel, professional development programs that have been implemented by people who have left or are leaving our district. Yakima School District has essentially financed their resumes so that they can improve their position in our industry, but not in our community. These purchases and continued hiring of our members allowed us to believe that we must have been financially sound. That felt like hard evidence to us. We started the year this year with a massive party at the convention center, where we all congratulated ourselves for choosing this demanding job as our life's work. We made the new teachers stand up so we could applaud them and encourage them in their new careers. We listened to the same stories and did the same chants together with our paid speaker, Luis Cruz, so that we could all go off to make our schools into by any means necessary schools and not pobrecito schools. Well, there will be many pobrecitos who are going to be missing the teachers that stood up that day when they come back to school in the fall. Yakima School District has hired over 100 teachers this fall, and today you will announce that we will be cutting most of them. Despite falling enrollment over several years, Yakima School District has budgeted for and hired almost 100 teachers a year for the past 4 years. It doesn't make sense to me that our district could get to where we are today if those responsible were paying attention to the realities of our financial and enrollment situations. This all feels like it was preventable. It feels like a waste. Tomorrow, many of our bright young teachers will get a letter from their principal telling them that they no longer have a job next year. Many others will find out that their positions no longer exist. There will be uncertainty and chaos in what is, for many of our students, the only stable place that they have in their lives. These teachers have been hired, started careers, and established themselves in their buildings. They are making the relationships with students and families and becoming a part of our community. And the Yakima School District has betrayed their trust. Yakima School District is taking our most vulnerable teachers and putting them out. Many of them were recruited to come here. Some were brought in by a recruiter who was paid to recruit them, and now we can't even afford to keep the teachers which we have recruited. YEA and the Yakima School District feel like we are back at square one. Trust broken, faith lost, and lessons learned. Our union will continue to support our members and do what is right for them and their families, especially when their employer will not. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have the annual curriculum and instruction report from Aaron Chaplin.
President Walker, may I introduce? All right, so I'd like to present our Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction, Erin Chaplin. I want to thank her for being here this evening to present this afternoon. Quite a tough commentary to follow, but appreciate you addressing what is happening with curriculum and instruction throughout the district. I also want to recognize your 11 years as a teacher in Lower Valley and Wapato. Certainly value add having somebody who has spent over a decade in the classroom, followed by more time at OSPI, and then joining our district in 2 director positions before assuming the executive directorship of curriculum instruction. So I want to thank you for your continued work, not only on behalf of Lower Valley students across the state, but being here and being a part of Yakima and leading our curriculum instruction department and sharing with us the information that you have for us this evening. So without further ado, Erin Chaplin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Walker and fellow board members and cabinet. Thank you for the opportunity to share the curriculum and instruction update for this year. Just a reminder, you have a copy of the full slide deck with further details. This afternoon, I will be specifically focusing in on 5 slides. All right, thank you. So as you remember, last year we went through pre-K through 12th grade English language arts and Spanish language arts curriculum review, which was completed at the end of the last school year. This year, we focused on providing targeted professional development to support teachers in implementing these new programs. 4 of our early release Wednesdays were focused in on supporting this effort, with separate sessions for grades kindergarten through 5 for CKLA for knowledge language arts and Caminos, and grades 6 through 12 language arts teachers, my perspectives. The importance of a guaranteed and viable curriculum cannot be overstated, and supporting this new implementation ensures a focus on high quality teaching and learning. Later this spring, we look forward to having teachers review the guaranteed standards that they selected last year and looking at the alignment to our new curriculum, ensuring that those are aligned. We do have a very exciting student work highlight. This is our second annual Voices writing contest. We are thrilled to report a successful year 2 for Yakima School District. We had a substantial increase in the number of both student and staff submissions, over 30% increase in comparison to last year, with a substantial increase in submissions in Spanish. So we are really thrilled to see that growth, reflecting growth toward our biliteracy goal. Winners will be recognized, as you can see on the slide here, in April at the end of the month at Eisenhower Auditorium, and I would encourage you to attend. We have so many talented students, and it is just a thrill to be able to recognize their skills, their talents, and have their families there to support that. Each winner will receive not only a certificate, but then a copy of the anthology for year 2. So this is just a reminder that our curriculum review cycle has been paused due to budgetary constraints. We did use this opportunity to strategically target how we can support mathematics instruction within the Yakima School District. We conducted one-on-one empathy interviews with teachers and principals, focusing on their experiences with math planning and instruction. This platform provided teachers and administrators to share specifics about effective practices in their mathematics planning and instruction. The insights gleaned from these interviews have been instrumental in shaping the work that we've been doing the remainder of this year and as we move forward in the district. Following the success of these secondary empathy interviews, we replicated this process with our elementary teachers, principals, and we added student voice when we work with our elementary staff, and we hope to incorporate that next year with secondary as well. We'll be using the information with the elementary empathy interviews to build a plan for next year as well. So taking a look at further professional learning, we have had dedicated time and focus monthly for our principals and instructional facilitators to collaborate on professional learning team best practices. In addition to this time, we've also had early release Mondays that have been dedicated to professional learning teams, with our teams having a focus on the 4 essential questions of a professional learning team. What do we want all students to know and be able to do? How will we know they have learned it? How will we respond if some students did not learn it? And how will we extend learning for those students who already do? In addition, our early release Wednesdays have focused on PLT products. That means things such as unit planning, unpacking standards, developing proficiency scales and learning targets, and creating common formative assessments. Our middle and high school content teams have had an opportunity to come together to identify guaranteed standards, as well as develop a year-long scope and sequence. Implementation, as I already mentioned, for our new English and Spanish language arts programs was dedicated to 4 of these early release Wednesdays. And in addition to that, a focus in literacy has been targeted for additional K-5 teachers to complete their letters. Professional learning, LETTERS stands for Language Essentials for the Teachers of Reading and Spelling. And this work has been focused specifically on vocabulary, comprehension, and writing. And this is continued evidence of Yakima School District's commitment to improving literacy through the science of reading. And finally, in order to maintain a strong coaching infrastructure within our district and to support professional learning teams and teachers, instructional facilitators and teachers on special assignment and administrators took part in some professional learning, specifically focused on coaching cycles, ensuring theoretical consistency across all sites, and increased clarity on roles and responsibilities. And with that, this concludes our curriculum and instruction update, and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I have a couple of questions, Aaron.
Uh-huh.
When I was looking at the slide that has the paused across it,
Correct.
the curriculum page, as I read that, what I took from that is that we do have curriculum that was purchased last year
Last year.
that would be in year one implementation this year.
Correct.
Is that going on?
That is currently going on, yes. So this is year one with core knowledge, language arts, Caminos, and my perspectives.
And then year two will be paused?
We will continue on with our implementation of our English language arts and Spanish language arts core programs. It is just the additional content areas where we are pausing. So this year we were due to have a curriculum review for mathematics, and we had to pause that, as we will our other content areas.
Okay. And then the other question has to do with the PLTs and the PLC program. We will continue that or no? Or will that be paused as well?
We will continue that implementation and refinement of those processes as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Next up, we have updates from members of the board. Any updates from board members?
There were no legislative proposals submitted for our consideration at this meeting, and the deadline for that submittal is April 8th. But since we don't have any meetings before that, this would have been the meeting that we would have discussed and approved that. The legislative committee's meeting comes up on April 19th and 20th. And so that's when we will see the proposals that have been submitted from local school boards. And the legislative committee will have that time for discussion and decision as to whether or not to support those as they go forward in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other reports from the board? Okay, thank you. Moving on. Dr. Green, you have the superintendent's update.
Thank you, President Walker, member of the board. I would like to start this evening with the School Nurse Organization of Washington Awards, better known as SNOW. And I can think of no better person to kick this off than the administrator, the SNOW Administrator of the Year for, what was that, Stacy? The decade? It was last year. She received the state award. So please, could you introduce our presenter here this evening to acknowledge some of our great staff members as nurses and the work that they do.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Green. Is Amy, there's Amy. So I'd like to introduce our Director of Health and Wellness, Amy Norton, who has just done an outstanding job as Director of our Nurse Health and Wellness Program over at Howie. And we have had numerous awards from SNOW in recognition of all the work that our health services has done over the last few years, and including Amy's award as the Nurse Administrator of the Year just this last fall. And so we have 4 awards to give away tonight. Not really, I shouldn't say giveaway like prizes, but we have 4 awards tonight in recognition of all the hard work that our nurses do, and I couldn't be prouder and more excited. So Amy, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
All right, can you hear me? Awesome. At Howie, our Health and Wellness Education Department, we believe that we must celebrate and recognize the good works that may be overlooked in the course of our regular work. This year, the School Nurse Organization of Washington has announced nursing award winners this spring at their conference, and 4 of our nurses have been honored. 2 of the 3 nurses this year for Washington State for the new nurse of the year were granted to Yakima. So we have 2 brand new nurses of the year who have done remarkable things in less than a full year that they've been on staff here. That is Dave Hunter, RN from Robertson. Oh. Wrong person, wrong award. All right, so our two new nurse award winners of the year are Jessica Alvarez of Whitney and McKinley. Come on up, Jessica. And Danita Ray, our nurse at Hoover. All right, actually they went. Go ahead. All right, photo time. Thank you. All right, we have 2 more awards, and these awards go for nurses that have saved a life. So we have 2 nurses in our district that have been able to step into situations and provide above and beyond care for a student and for a staff member this year. So we have 2 of our Saved a Life award winners. We have Tara Alexander of Garfield Elementary. And now Dave Hunter from Robertson. I would like to thank the board for the opportunity to recognize these amazing nurses. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
If I could.
Oh,
Travis,
yes, please.
just a minute. Amy, just a sec. I'm going. As a result of Amy's work in this position, and I'm trying to remember, has it been 4 years or 3 years? 3 years Amy's been in this position. We have been widely recognized at the state level as one of the top health and wellness systems in school districts in the state of Washington. And my hat's off to Amy Norton and all the work that she's done with our nurses and our community health workers and her assistant director. Just outstanding services our students and families receive. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Locke, and thank you, Amy Norton. We're making very good use of the facility and all the work that's happening there to support our community. So thank you for continuing to carry that torch. As we move forward this evening, this is just a wonderful opportunity to share with you some really fun things that are happening in our district. As far as at the Discovery Early Learning Center, I would like to invite John Soler up here with us. But while he's approaching the front, could we please put up on the screen just some great news that we have with Lucas Yeager, our principal there, who is not here at the moment. But the reason that Principal Yeager is not here is because he and his wife as I slow down. He and his wife have traveled after a very long wait and much vetting. They arrived at their destination, and you will see a wonderful image of Principal Yeager and his wife in a few minutes. Maybe we'll come back to that. Okay, so I'll let the build up. As soon as we get that, we'll show you why Principal Yeager isn't here. But thank you, John Solar, Assistant Principal, for being here, and wonderful for your service to the Early Learning Center over the last 3 years as an intern, then last year and this year. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And you have brought forth just a wonderful opportunity for branding. Oh, here we go, right up here. So there is Principal Yeager and his wife picking up their adopted daughter. So there it is right now. We're so happy for him and his wife. And I did, when I found out, I didn't know until very recently. He told me last week. I'm like, what? Aren't you going to be? You're going to be at the meeting to present? He said he couldn't. And I said, well, why? And he told me, and I said, okay, I'll keep it a secret. And he said, don't bother. My wife has it all over Facebook. It's everywhere. So they're very excited about that, and we wish them well. So now, Discovery Early Learning Center, please tell us about this wonderful branding opportunity that we have in front of us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Green and School Board. So when Principal Lucas started this year, one thing he noticed is as we become a building, we don't have a mascot to represent us, where all the other buildings in the district have a mascot. So he did his research and realized that there's board policies around this, and so he started this work. So the first step to do is to get input from families, from staff members and students. And so we sent out surveys and we got a bunch back. As you can see, we had to figure out an image. We had to figure out an importance why. And so we came back with butterflies. We have dinosaurs, discoverers, explorers, smiley faces, imagination, incredible learning, kids for baby goats, kitties, pups, sloths, squirrels, sun with sunglasses. Like, we got a long list of information and about why this should represent early learning. So from that list, we had to develop a committee to narrow down this list. And so Principal Lucas and teachers and our community faith partners, as well as staff, students, and families, met together to narrow this list down to 5 options. And so out of those 5 options, it was determined that butterflies, dinosaurs, discoverers, kids, and explorers were the 5 options that this committee put together that might represent Discovery Early Learning. So the next step there is we had to get our student population to vote on this. And this is really hard to do with preschoolers, especially when we have such a wider range of skills at preschooler. But we gave this task to our teachers with this visual right here, and they came through. They were incredible in getting this data for us. So not only did we want the students to have input, we were like, well, we represent teachers and we represent families. We wanted their input. So we sent out survey to our staff as well as our families to be able to narrow down these options. So overwhelmingly, the kids, they love looking at all these pictures, and you can imagine what most preschoolers picked, and they chose dinosaurs. They wanted to be the Discovery dinosaurs. The other side of that is the adults and the families. They overwhelmingly chose the explorers. So we've narrowed it down to these 2 options, and now we present to the board and Superintendent Green to make that final decision. So you get to make that final decision. But one of our very talented teachers is great at technology. Thought, why can't we do both? Why can't we be dinosaurs and explorers? So what I'm about to show you is not approved or anything, but it's something we wanted to share to you because we feel like it represents all of Discovery Early Learning. And we have our Discovery dinosaur, but we're the explorers. And so I know Dr. Green's already asked for t-shirts and sweaters and stuff like that. So he's going to be running around town once we can get this approved. But this is what we've been doing here to represent Discovery Early Learning for the Yakima School District. Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, John. Do we have any questions of the board for John Solar?
All right.
Do we have any preference of the board of any of the? Just want to make sure I'm taking some of this weight
We
off.
got to get more data in here to make this vote.
Okay. Well, thank you. And then next steps, Kirsten, would you like to approach the podium and share next steps with the board?
Certainly. Kirsten Fitterer, Executive Director of Communications and Engagement. And I can confirm for the board that Discovery Early Learning has followed Operational Procedure 4226 and all the steps to create a mascot for their school. The next official step is that, and you might have to make a little adjustment, John, we might get another one in there, but it says the top name suggestion along with the next two preferences will be submitted to the superintendent for approval. So that is where we sit now. And then after that is selected, the mascots and the publicized names will be in the website and a branding guide will be created.
Thank you, Kirsten. Any other questions or any questions of the board at this time? Right, wonderful. So it's so nice to think about our little dinosaurs or explorers or even kids out there. Love that baby goat topic as well. And now it takes me to our next moment to share with you here in the superintendent update. The Yakima School District is now able to announce that the school board was recognized as one of 15 Magna Award winners, a Silver Award winner, which is a national recognition through the National School Board Directors Association. And it was for the work with listening to students, student voice council. At the time, it was a superintendent student voice council. Now we've changed it to the student voice council. And we have many of our students here this evening to present on their student voice policy. So it's the policy work on which the award is really centered, because if you look around the state and what is happening with students, it's placing students, typically students are placed on the board and they sit on the board and we have very minimal representation, maybe one or two board members for an entire district. It's a testament to our board of directors that you are trying to involve as many voices as possible. And we see that we have in the front row and Valeria sitting behind Ezra, our past student fellows, and then we have new additions to expand our student fellow development alongside our student voice council, which continues to be dozens upon dozens of students who are led by our student leaders here. So we certainly wanted to recognize, it's wonderful that we have so many people here to really put our students here at the front and center of what we do, and in setting what will become, hopefully within the next month, the second policy completely designed and shepherded through the process of getting approved. And I know of no other district in the state. I'm sure maybe there's another one in the country, but I'm not aware of any that will put the development of policy in the hands of students. And to put it in perspective, our students have spent, and I'm just looking at them and they're shaking their heads because they have spent well over a year, 2 years. So Luann, thank you, is staying. Nope, 2 years. 2 years developing a policy to guide what students want and expect around student voice. And for them to take the time to do this and recognize that we have some fellows that are on the cusp of graduating and they will not necessarily see the benefit of what they have worked for, but knowing that they leave a legacy for others then to pay forward beyond them is really something that we want to highlight and recognize. So I did want to call that out, and the information, you've all been shared a copy of the latest magazine from the National School Board Association. It does have an article highlighted, and for those in attendance, just simply letting everybody know that it is really a struggle to think about what to support travel-wise and what not to support. And I really commend the board for agonizing over what this could look like, and knowing that we are supporting our students and that ultimately the award is directly related to them. And I do see in the future an opportunity for our students who remain to hopefully present at the national level. They have already presented at regional and state level on their work. And so that continues to be a beacon of exceptionalism for the state to really strive for. So we wanted to recognize certainly that 2024 Magna Silver Award and acknowledge our students in that process. Does the board have any question about the award or anything else that I could answer regarding the School Board Association?
I
Whatnot?
just
Yes.
want to say, this is a really big deal. Out of all the school boards across the country, there were 4 selected for this award in our size category, which is 5,000 to 20,000 students. And you got to think that there's, more than a couple school boards across school districts and school boards across this country that fall into that category. And we are one of 4. It speaks a lot to the work, the hard work that you all have put in into developing the policies that you have. And I just can't begin to express to you how big a deal this is. It doesn't sound like a big deal when somebody says that to you, but it is a really big deal, and you should be very proud of your work and what you've done as a part of the Student Voice Council. Thank you very much.
I would love for, Jake, could we remove the podium and have our students, all of our student fellows here, just take a photo. We'd love to celebrate your work, and thank you. All of you, you don't have to be one of the fellows from last year. We need all of our fellows. Thank you. You're gonna have to squeeze in though. We need you all that behind you, so. So later this evening, we are going to hear the first reading of the student voice policy. And I know that maybe some of our, I think that we have some other commitments around 6 o'clock with National Honor Society. So we will certainly have some of you here, but we wanted to acknowledge all of you at this moment, recognizing that you might not be able to stay for the entire event this evening. So thank you. And then the last item that I would share with the school board is the wonderful announcement of the WIAA Executive Board announcing on the 17th of this month that the Yakima School District will host the 1A, 2B, and 1B WIAA State Track and Field Championships from 2025 to 2028. And that is a huge deal. I'm looking at Sarah and the work that she has done as a district athletic director. And when we talk about the impact on the community, Sarah, could I have you just go ahead and tell us the number of the impact? I know that you researched this today with Rich Austin. But could you? Oh, there you go. Got to make you uncomfortable and get up there.
Is the mic on? The estimated revenue to the valley is $2.9 million. 2.9 million.
So it's part of being a good neighbor and not just recognizing that we do ask things of the community, and we are just so blessed with our community reaching out and supporting public education to the tune of 65+% on the levy passage. And similarly, when we can extend services and provide an opportunity for other communities around the state to come here to Yakima, it highlights not only our school system, but it highlights our community. And we know that that resonates through businesses. Hotels are booked from Prosser to Ellensburg. And last year was our first year. We had the first 2 years to as kind of a trial period. And there was so much recognized after the first year that there was an overwhelming vote to award it up through 2028. So we're thankful for all of those that have continued to contribute to work towards this, because this certainly is the result of the work of Rich Austin, but also Sarah here, Stacy. We can even think about, Phil English at Eisenhower has been coaching track and field forever and was instrumental in the facility that we have there, along with other coaches at Davis and surrounding areas that have contributed in many, many ways. So that will be announced on the news this evening, I believe. And we're just excited. I'm getting the nod from Austin. Thank you, Austin Peppers, for the interview and for, oh, you're not Austin. I'm sorry. Hunter. Okay. Thank you. Got to hear it 3 times. Thank you, Hunter. And recognizing that moving forward. So thank you, Sarah, very much. And with that, let's go ahead and proceed with the remainder of the meeting. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Next up, we have calendar updates and future agenda.
Sorry, one more. I'm sorry. Yep, I missed one thing. Do I have Heather Hasty here? Heather, could you come on up? Wonderful, Heather. As you walk up to the front, let me just share one other item that's happening in recognizing Yakima across the state. One of the opportunities that we've had recently is to connect with the University of Washington, and we don't typically see that come across the mountains. If you're over on the I-5 corridor, there are many partnerships with the University of Washington and many school districts. However, Heather has managed to bridge that gap, and she has brought in not only the University of Washington to work with her staff and observe what's happening, but she is leading staff work around what is called Authentic Carino. And she is here to share some of that success that is currently happening at Davis and how that is resonating across the state. So thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much. And I also have one of my partners here, Assistant Principal, Ms. Jewel Brumley. So just to let you know, this is just a slice of some of the work that's happening at Davis High School with our students and with our staff members. And so it's our journey to authentic Carino. And in case any of the board members would like to look later, research and everything in there too, so that you can see where our work's kind of coming from. Okay, so what this is about, it's about building a system of caring. So being very intentional and we're trying to build the excitement of the journey. We're analyzing where we are currently, expanding our systems of care. And this is about the familial side of Carino. It's also about intellectual as well as critical. And so we start with the familial side of the Carino, and you can see it's a word that doesn't translate exactly to care, okay, in the English language, but all of these above are some different words our staff has brainstormed and students about what it means. Okay, the beautiful struggle. So why does this matter? Why this matters is because if we have culture of care with the familial side and then the intellectual piece of caring, we can take the relationality we have with students and students have with us to then work together and work with families, students, and teachers all together, as well as other staff, to then get to high expectations in the intellectual. So it's using the relational to get to the intellectual side. Our journey, Davis High School, fall of 2022 is when we started our journey. So with just what's authentic learning? What does it mean? What does it mean to students? What's it mean to staff? And then moving towards to that spring of 2023, where we did student voice circles and had a lot of other avenues for student voice, including interviews. Fall 2023, we did an Authentic Carino introduction to all of our staff. And then winter, monthly Authentic Carino refined and actionable. And then with spring, what we're doing right now is we're tying our work with this to our instructional round. So our instructional learning team, leadership team is coming up. They designed a possibility of practice around instructional rounds, which are different than just a learning walk or a walkthrough. And so we've been working on that, what that looks like and how it ties to the intellectual Carino and the high expectations and what we're looking for and analyzing as a school when we come back together after doing rounds. Then fall 2024 and beyond, all staff focused on Authentic Carino as well as students. This is one of our favorite slides. So Davis culture has always been about caring. It's in our DNA. It's just, this is about formalizing that journey. So this is a poster you see often around our school. At Davis, we are family. And this just talks about what does it mean? What does Davis culture mean to students? And what's it mean to be a family? Networks of care. So this comes out of the Authentic Carino research as well. There needs to be multiple areas of care, the education, peer networks, knowing systems, health, We heard a lot about that earlier. That's so important. Adult allies, that's the center. We have adult allies within there. The cariño itself, and then family. So these slides, these next couple slides, we can go through actually, Barb, fairly quickly, but it's just staff input on the cariño and what are some things we see on trust, personal stories, administrators checking in. So there's a lot of different things we're doing and a lot of different systems we're doing to really capture student voice, learning from our students, learning from our families, and learning from each other as staff. Okay, work in progress. Sorry, sometimes the work is messy. It's a work in progress. What's authentic learning really mean outside of four walls? So with students too, what are different authentic learning experiences that they've had with staff, different authentic learning experiences we have, and then what made those authentic? And then how do we bring that authenticity and the intellectual care and the familial care all together to create learning experiences for our students that are meaningful? And so we talk, actually, Barb, if you go back real quick, that's just we're focusing on professional development the last couple of years, our professional learning teams, instructional leadership team at Davis, and then all the student and staff input that we're getting and receiving. And then just a few ways to show how it is coming forward in our data, what we've done so far. So our discipline data, if you see, and I'll be honest, I need a new prescription or something because I'm having a hard time with this. But what I know this is over the last 3 years, our discipline data by month and how it's going down. So the orange is this year, okay? Blue last year, the gray is the year before. Each month you see it's coming down from the year before, Tardy and attendance data, just a couple more slides to show you. And so what you'll see here is period rate attendance. And again, you're seeing by month over the last few years. And so if you look, for example, at February, so period rate attendance, and this looks the opposite. So actually you want the bar to be high, okay? So that's showing our period rate attendance right now in the month of March is over 90%. And that is up from the month of March in other years. And then our tardy data, because we're really working on tardies and attendance, and our tardy data has actually gone down again, month by month over the last couple of years. You can see, look at March right there. Last year, this time, tardy data. This year, this time, tardy data. Significant decrease in tardies. And right here, if Joel, you want to talk about this slide?
So we focused on our migrant students and our native students in 9th grade and how their grades at the beginning of the year, the number of students that were passing all 6 classes, so they were on track to learn. And then as we went through grade checks and meetings with these students, what was the increase of students, the percentage of students in 9th grade that were passing all 6 classes? And you can see 27.4 was the largest increase. That was with our native ed students from midterm to first semester, but then overall in the year long, our native ed students grew 36% that were passing all classes, and our migrant students grew 2.65%. It's a difference in the in value, right? A few students in the native ed makes a bigger difference in percentage, but with the focus on our 9th graders on track, and in those 2 demographics, we've increased as they started out not as good at the beginning of the year.
And a large part of that's attributed to our teachers for their intentional focus and lesson design as well, and looking at their student groups and their grades. And then just last piece, we did have a site visit, actually it was last Friday, UW for all visit. And one of the things that Dr. Anthony Craig, who is one of the professors at University of Washington, who works with us, with our students, one of the quotes from him, as well as colleagues, but this is his quote: "I want to be here at Davis High School more often. This is a place that welcomes all of us and pushes toward the future I envision for Yakima and beyond. And I think it's important to note that he's from White Swan. And so his vision for the Otherwise, it's coming to fruition through us, through our students, and through our staff. And students, more of our students here were actually on the student panels when they came. So student panels, and then they did teacher interviews as well. And then this is just real quickly, the counseling, security, our office professionals, and administration all working together as well. Okay, and Barb, I believe that's the last slide. So thank you very much. Thanks for letting us share.
Thank you, Joy.
Before we move on, I would like to ask our audience to please show courtesy to who is ever at the podium. I find it very distressing to hear loud conversation from the back of the room when someone is presenting. I'm a former special education teacher, and such behavior would not have been acceptable in my classroom. Please show the same respect to speakers here. Thank you. Okay, next up on our agenda, we have calendar updates and future agenda topics. Kirsten, would you update us, please, on some highlights in the calendar?
Yes, of course I will. Thank you, President Walker. In addition to the school events that we have listed in the board packet, as well as the varsity sport events, I wanted to bring a few district-wide events to your attention. On March 28th, there will be Mr. Ike ceremony at Eisenhower at 7 p.m. On April 12th, the Yamate Japanese Welcome Banquet will occur at Davis at 3 p.m. April 16th, the Parent and Family Engagement event featuring Japanese Cultural Showcase at Eisenhower will be from 4 to 7 p.m. On April 18th, 19th, 20th, 27th, the high school musical at Davis High School will be at 7 p.m. and Saturday also offers a 2 p.m. Performance. On April 25th, the Excellence in Education event will be in the Ike Auditorium at 5 p.m. And lastly, on April 30th, like we heard from Aaron Chaplin earlier, the second annual Voices writing contest at Eisenhower at 6:30 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for board members and the public, there's a full listing of those events in the board documents of other school events and numerous athletic events coming up in the next couple of weeks. Okay, at this point, we have arrived at the first opportunity for comment from the public on agenda items. We have 3 people signed up to comment. I would ask that you all approach the podium so we can save some time, and when one is finished, the next one can step in. These are all, I believe, YEA representatives. And remember, you have 3 minutes to comment, and we will not be responding to your comments, but we will respond later in writing. Thank you. First up, we have Michael Clark.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Mike Clark, Ridgeview Elementary, YEA Board. Back when I worked in county corrections, my director asked me for help because commissioners wanted us to take a 5% cut. I showed him how we could easily absorb that cut with no pain or difficulty whatsoever. Upon which he looked at me and said, "That's not what I'm asking. I need reasons why we can't cut." What do you think he told the county commissioners at their next meeting? And as board members, how do you know that you are getting the unvarnished truth? Isn't it strange how easy the superintendent has made it to fire hundreds of people who neither need to be nor deserve to be fired? I know you've been told they need to go. But there are many ways to solve this self-inflicted budget crisis without firing our way out of it. We can use program adjustments, move junior teachers into hard-to-fill positions, and contracted district subs. And seasoned elementary teachers could be encouraged to volunteer to move into any open middle school positions which are qualified. We could probably do similar moves for paras. These are things we know how to do, and it would save millions. And yes, we do also need to address the bloated central administration, because We need special education teachers a whole lot more than we need 4 directors in SES. Why is the proposed RIF so large? Because beginning teachers don't make much money. You get about 6 of them for the price of 1 superintendent. In just a bit, Jake is going to lay out some numbers that will quantify some of the harm that out-of-control spending has already caused, and a proposed course of action that will deeply harm the district in ways impossible to calculate. I think he will effectively make the case that whoever is responsible for this mess could be easily and immediately fired for cause. Make no mistake, the shocking lack of fiscal discipline as well as the grotesque proposed solution are both profound betrayals of the public trust. If we're going to dig our way out of this, we need to work together. It won't be easy and it won't be painless. The harm is real. And we may not be able to save everyone, but not to try is completely unacceptable. We need moral, principled leadership now. And if current leadership says they can't do without a RIF, I recommend you just point to the door. That's what the county commissioner should have done those many years ago. And no, they never did cut our funding. Tonight, you will choose either the path of least resistance that has been carefully laid out for you, or you'll choose to do the right thing. You have the chance to save the Yakima School District. And I wish I was exaggerating. Stand with us for what's right. Stand up for this district. Stand up for us. Stand up for our students and families. Stand up for the voters who just approved our levy, and stand up for the taxpayers who will pay it. Thank you for serving on our board. I mean it.
Next up, we have Francis Guerrero.
Francis Guerrero, Vice President of YEA and heir apparent to the presidency. I just want to make sure that you understand the full magnitude of what you're about to do, because it doesn't feel like you do. When you have the nerve to reprimand this crowd and say such behavior would never be accepted in your classroom, you have no idea what they deal with in their classrooms. And you cannot possibly know how many new hires thought they were safe to begin starting their families, only to have their jobs and their insurance ripped away in at least one instance before the employee has even given birth. I doubt you understand the resentment and bitterness that will linger for these staff members, as it still lingers for many who are victims of rifts that happened as far back as the 80s. As you take their jobs, because apparently their labor is not as valuable to you as your own raises, your own upper level management employees for the buildings you have bought, or the $1 million renovations recently completed. Do you have any idea what a slap in the face it is to know that those are your priorities over those who actually work with students? And there is clearly a lack of understanding of the depth of talent we will lose when you RIF so many new hires. Their fresh blood has often carried others, including myself, as they have done the legwork for a new curriculum that I still struggle to keep up with. They have taught my team how to incorporate technology to make lessons more engaging and alleviated so much stress with their shared lessons. It makes me sick to my stomach to think of how many highly skilled staff members we will lose to other districts. COVID and the infusion of so much new blood into our system over the last few years caused us to temporarily disregard the markedly toxic environment in this district. Finally, having decent staffing at the principal, counselor, and specialist levels made dealing with the highly problematic students more workable. Teachers grit their teeth and bear with atrocious learning environments every single day. They are burdened with stressful reminders that they are not trusted to be absent on Mondays and Fridays without getting repeatedly, needlessly reprimanded. Your smile is your logo, your personality is your business card, and how you leave others feeling becomes your trademark. Your logo is insidious, and your business card is cold callous and cruel. YSD's trademark has regressed all the way back to the noxious environment that compelled YEA to have the incivility investigated in the first place. With today's unforgivable RIF action, you remind us of that toxicity and the need for us to organize better to change these conditions. Today, you give us a reason to activate our members, to exercise our power as a union, and to start holding YSD more accountable for how they do business.
Next up, we have Haley Atkinson.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Obviously, I'm a young teacher. I started teaching last year. I was recruited to teach at Eisenhower. I didn't even think I was going to go into teaching. I was super excited about the opportunity. I was in a really specific situation last year where your team gave me an extra contract on accident. And I signed the contract. I double checked with my ID. I said, this is a lot of money. Is this correct? You signed the contract. 3 other assistant superintendents signed the contract. I was paid the money, and then months later, I was told I have to pay it back because it was wrong. I was 21 at the time, 21, and I was sitting there with people of power looking at me and saying, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. You're just going to pay it back. And this was about $10,000, by the way. And at 21, I was terrified because I have these people of power looking at me and they're like, it's really not a big deal. You're just going to pay us back. And I said, this was not an overpayment. You gave me a contract and I got my contracted amount. So this is not an overpayment. And I was looked in the eyes and there's witnesses to this. And I said, okay, well, you're not going to coach next year if you don't pay us back. And I love my job. That's why I do it. Obviously, I don't get paid that much as a first-year teacher. I love my coaching job. I would do anything for those kids. And I literally thought there's no way I'm giving up those kids for $10,000. There's no way I could do it. And so I signed a reimbursement contract and I'm in debt to you guys for 3 years. And I'm going to also lose my job as a teacher. So the trust is not there. No one helped me. I was 21. I didn't know what I was doing. And for you guys to almost say, like, trust us, I did that one time. And here I am in this position. It's like I'm kind of getting screwed over again. And nobody knows that because I didn't want to say anything because you guys could do whatever you want to me. I was told that you could take away something that I loved, and that was coaching, and that was my kids. And so I don't know now what my situation is with, I'm going to lose my job. So it was in the contract that you take my last check. If that's how much money it's going to be, you'll take that. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And this didn't just happen to me. This happened to another individual who I'll obviously keep disclosed because she didn't come up here, but this happened to us. This was a $20,000 mistake. And it was a contracted amount. This is not an overpayment. And so I love Eisenhower. I am an alumni from Eisenhower. I love my kids. I love what I do. I would not be standing here. So I'd say, ever I'll leave coaching. And so it's just disheartening to see other people go through similar things that I've gone through.
Thank you for your comments. Next up on the agenda, we have 2 approval items. First is approval of a selected service provider and contract for internet service provider services in the amount of $198,000 over 5 years. Mr. Cooper.
Good evening, members of the board. Senator Green. For you is an approval for E-rates, which is a standard approval. It's required given it's federal funds. It's below the $500,000 threshold. Feedback. Below the $500,000 threshold, but required to receive E-rate. So Director Gonzalez is here somewhere if you have any technical questions, but I would recommend an approval and as it is a procedural vote. Are there any
Do I
questions?
hear a motion from the board?
I move approval of the selected service provider and contract for internet service providers in the amount of $198,000 over 5 years.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the select service provider contract. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Or questions for Mr. Gonzalez? Hearing none, Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett,
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
Aye.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva,
Aye.
President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Next up is the approval of resolution 4.23.24 program reduction in force for 2024-25. We've each, as a board member, have received numerous details and individual discussions with the superintendent already. So I would entertain a motion at this time, and then we can include Mr. Cooper's report as part of the discussion.
I move approval of the resolution 04.23.24 program reduction in force for the 2024-25 school year as submitted.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Would you have some discussion? Mr. Cooper will provide some discussion.
President Walker, members of the board, I will go ahead and kick off this evening and do the introduction here and setting the stage for Mr. Cooper. First and foremost, I want to again thank our students for being here. They have worked long and hard to understand how policy governance works and have a very great understanding of that. And what is happening this evening is a great learning experience, not only for the adults in the room, but certainly our students who will serve in the next generation. So I'm glad that they're able to be a part of this. In addition, I want to thank our last 3 speakers who did come up, especially our young teacher at the end. And I want her to know that we will be reaching out to her because I would love to know more detail about what did happen. And it was great to hear from Mr. Clark. I know that he continues to do great things over at Ridgeview with the work that he's doing there at the elementary level. I continue to hear that from Chris Jensen and see the impact that he has as a teacher. And of course, Franny Guerrero and the work that she does. I know that my son had her as National Honor Society as well as her sister, and considers the family very close as far as the work that her sister has done in being one of his favorite teachers. So knowing that there's a family of educators out there and that it does impact so many of us, what we're talking about today, I think it's important to know that I will be responding to all of the information that was shared. And I know that we have press here, and so I look forward to clarifying some of the misconceptions that have been shared. But at this point, I don't think any of us would be opposed to making sure that there are accuracies and that we're able to then build upon those. So continuing then, I would like to, in setting the stage for Jake Cooper and shifting the financial implications, I think it's important to share, again, here in a public setting, as I have so many times, and 24 staff meetings across our district, that we have several school districts that are now in binding conditions, that are operating at a deficit. And we were just recently acknowledged that Tukwila School District is now the 4th district to go to binding conditions, joining Marysville, LaConner, and Mountain Baker as the other 3. And so we see that many districts are on the cusp of a similar challenge or catastrophe. It truly is insidious what is happening with educational funding around the state. I cite the words of Washington Education Association President Larry Delaney, who recently called the percentage of the budget devoted to education as inadequate and declared that more funding is needed to prevent school closures as well as staff reductions and other cuts. Similarly, according to our numbers here in the state, the Washington State Standard cited a K-12 enrollment numbers have dropped by 47,885. Again, that is the Washington State Standard, and that is since 2019-2020 school year. Moving forward with some other acknowledgements here, WA President Delaney again proclaimed that inflation and enrollment decline is part of a perfect storm. Adam Wilson, spokesperson for the State Auditor's Office, echoed Delaney's claim, stating, "You have declining enrollment, which means declining funding from the state. You have increased cost in terms of personal and increased cost of living. And then you have the disappearance of some of those pandemic funds from the federal government. That's a trifecta." And Larry Delaney, again, WEA president, added, "It would be much easier if it were just one of those things, but having all of those challenges coming at the same time certainly causes a problem." At this time, I would like to draw the attention to a slideshow. If we could bring that up, Barb. It is the reduction in force timeline. And some of this may be difficult to see. It is accessible, or I believe it will be. The board does have this in front of them in form of a document. It's Yakima School District 2023-2024 reduction timeline. And if you look at the timeline, in July of 25, July 25th of 23, we had our first reading and then passed the resolution 12/22/23 on August 15th. On October 18th, all staff were informed of reductions that had currently taken place to begin making adjustments across the system. That included a reduction of an assistant superintendent and other director positions, as well as adjustments to non-managerial classified and certified staff through attrition. In addition, the math curriculum adoption was paused. That was October 18th. In November, next slide, we had November 2nd, although he was already privy to this information through past board meetings, YEA President John Kavanaugh was personally informed of pending reductions. And then November 14th, CFO Jake Cooper presented the financial open session presentation notifying the collective board of pending reductions. And we had principals from every one of our buildings present to recognize the threats and weaknesses we were currently facing as a state. Enrollment decline, recession and inflation, pending legislative session, ESSER funds being fully spent and allocated, and the continual gap in state and federal revenue for special education. On November 16th, we had all of our principals, not all of our principals, all of our administrators, so principals, executive directors, directors, were informed of pending reductions at the leadership team meeting. On the 20th, we had union leadership from each non-administrative bargaining unit were invited to an informal meeting about pending reductions. That's November 20th. And YPA leadership, our principals, were acknowledged that they would be or recognized for their expertise at the building level, and that they would begin being involved in individual meetings to have a systems review with clear leadership decision-making boundaries. And we would seek input around, from their perspective around the system, to have an in-depth understanding of what is currently happening in the buildings and what we could do to make sure that we were addressing the reductions in a very thoughtful way. November 28th through the 30th, we did have those individual meetings. They lasted between a half an hour and an hour, depending on the individuals. And that happened over the course of 3 days. December 1st through February 2nd, then, there were 2 months of staff meetings. And I personally met with each building staff. And that was to share both factual levy information and budgetary reduction information. And that occurred over 2 months. And I did return to present a second time to staff requesting additional follow-up to clarify budgetary information. One of those buildings was Ridgeview, where Michael Clark is currently a teacher. So I did follow up to give even more clarifying information at that time, and that happened in more than one building, as many who wanted me to return and explain the current situation. December 5th, we did then host an administrative elementary cohort meeting with all of our elementary principals to consider staffing and programming from an elementary perspective, after having the time to really reflect on their individual assessment of their buildings in operation. On December 6th, we did the same thing with our secondary principals, acknowledging them as a group and hearing their ideas collectively around potential reductions and addressing the budget that, again, as Larry Delaney from WA recognized, that is facing the entire state. On December 7th, I then hosted a assistant principal cohort meeting with all of our assistant principals to let them know about pending reductions that were around the corner in January and the impact on them in the assistant principal role. December 11th, we had the most current information. CFO Jake Cooper, Deputy Superintendent Locke, and I began to assess the financial department's first draft as a springboard on what would then eventually become the recommendation to the board here this evening. December 15th, then, in January 3rd and January 5th, We expanded those individual system meetings to include directors and executive directors to assess programming and consider their staffing. That brings us to January 2nd, where we then hosted an all non-administrative bargaining unit leader meeting. So all of our bargaining unit presidents were here to meet about pending reductions, current projected budget, and the status of public education funding. And also present was Marie Cantus from the state. She was state representative from WEA, acknowledging the challenges currently facing districts across the state. January 10th, we had all administrators updated on leadership reduction timelines. And on the 12th, we had 10 assistant principals that were informed of position elimination pending board action. I will call the attention to this as really just truly acknowledges how difficult this is and yet how professional people are in the most difficult of circumstances. I do believe that crisis does not often build character. It really reveals character. And we saw that in the reduction of many of our assistant principals who on a Friday were notified of position elimination pending board action. And yet on the following Monday, many of them were at the Martin Luther King Jr. Day Parade, marching with their schools, acknowledging the community and carrying a banner to recognize the impact of Martin Luther King Jr. on the community, but to also unify us as a system. And I really appreciate the work of our assistant principals in such a dire time in showing their leadership. On January 16th, all staff then, everybody did receive across the district notification. This is January 16th, key updates on budgetary alignment and staffing adjustments. So that was, again, recapping what had happened as far as the paused math adoption, the reductions in 23-24 of an assistant superintendent and director of positions, and then also the absorption of non-managerial classified and certified positions through attrition. And then on Friday, January 12th, a notification again by seniority of, they were notified of the reductions of our assistant principals. So 4 days later, the rest of the district knew what was happening with our assistant principals. January 23rd and 24th, I was able to appear in Olympia and lobby with other superintendents for state funding. I was able to speak with 6 legislative representatives and 3 senators. And I do at this venue extend an invitation to John Kavanaugh and other YA leadership to enter with me in further conversations with legislators, both locally and in Olympia. So if you would like to, John, engage in that, I would be very excited to have that unified support moving forward in Olympia for a stronger Yakima. On January 23rd and 24th, after that lobbying, I need to move forward. January 31st through the 1st of February, we informed the district that Kinder Academy absorption was going back into the normal calendar at the start of school. And then in February 1st, all staff were notified about the Kinder Academy adjustment. So first we notified the impacted kindergarten teachers and then notified the entire organization. On February 27th, the assistant superintendent, one of our assistant superintendents was informed of position elimination. On February 23rd, we had 5 members of the board. All 5 members of the board then began to meet over the course of February 23rd to March 25th to meet individually with me and with our CFO to review budget reductions by program and by position. On March 1st, our directors were informed of position eliminations. So that news came out this month. It was also very difficult for our directors to hear of reductions that were taking place alongside assistant principals who had been announced that earlier and assistant superintendents. We did acknowledge that to our entire district and shared in addition that we were engaging in an alternative secondary learning merger. So that would be our alternative secondary learning programs coming together to be more effective to the needs of our students. And that was a merger between it'll be Yakima, Online, Open Doors, and Stanton. And we're very excited about that and met with staff on several occasions since that time. Both Deputy Locke and I have been there to meet with them as recently as last week. And we also then on February 23rd through March 5th, that's when we met individually with the CFO and me to review programs and positions. On March 7th, the legislative session concluded, which allowed our finance department to then take in all the information about additional funding coming from the state or additional expenditures in unfunded mandates impacting our district. So that was the time then that Jake and his team did need to make sure that our numbers were correct then moving forward. And then March 22nd, which was just last week, I engaged in one of our ongoing superintendent YEA president one-on-one meetings. So we do meet several times a year. And I will just mention that I greatly appreciate the meetings that we have on a one-on-one basis. And I only wish that the conversation would have centered around some of the things that I've heard this evening. And I open up that invitation as well to utilize those conversations one-on-one to address things in that we can really impact at a much earlier state. The last items that I'll share with you is that all staff was then informed this morning that we have dual language programming that will continue throughout our district in the 10 schools that currently have dual language. And Gilbert and Robertson that were scheduled to have kindergarten dual language next year will be on pause for this year, as we will also reach out to kindergarten students, the families of students who want kindergarten dual language, and look at the vacancies across the district to support those students. And one of the benefits of doing that is certainly to make sure that our students with longevity that are not bilingual are maintained in the district, and we are not hiring from the outside to bring in new teachers while we could potentially be reducing internal teachers. And we're able to do that because of to make accommodations for our incoming kinder students because of the wonderful programming that we have currently in the 10 buildings that we have and the space that we have seen in availability. So I will keep the board posted on what that looks like for our kinder students at both Gilbert and Robertson. And that brings us today, which is March 25th, and the presentation here to the board about program reductions and including the following most up-to-date financial drivers, which is Jake is taking into account the recently passed local levy measure, completed legislative session, projected enrollment for 2024-25, updated salary schedules and benefits, and reductions and cost-saving measures that have been executed to date. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Superintendent Green, members of the board. Thank you all for being here this evening. This is not going to be an easy meeting. A few things before I begin the presentation. I've been a CFO in Washington State for, this is my 22nd year. I've managed large budgets. There has never been, or there never is, a good time to do a budget reduction. I have never sat at this podium or given presentations over my 2-decade career where people, anybody, administration, or those in rank and file, were happy to receive a budget reduction. There's never a good time. There are also different philosophies on how you manage a budget. We talked about doing reductions maybe earlier. Well, we're taking budget reductions earlier than we're taking support earlier. We're taking positions earlier. There are all different philosophies about how you manage a budget. One philosophy is you maintain the supports as long as possible, and then you make the reduction. The other one is the multi-year reduction after reduction after reduction. That also provides some fatigue on an organization because it's one reduction after another after another. And so I wanted to, just speak to you a little bit about that. There are different philosophies on how to manage budgets this large. This is a $300 million operating budget. So if I'm wrong 1%, as I said at this podium before, that's $3 million. Those are big, big swings. So I'm going to go through a set of numbers that's available publicly as well. So I'm going to go through and I'll talk about administrative overhead. We have the lowest overhead in Yakima County. That's publicly available data. You can compare it to the state. We're nearly 2 points below the state in overhead. Again, all publicly available data. So there's a few things that I'm going to bring about that may run counter to the testimony earlier. It's not to be disrespectful. It's just the data that I have before me. So I'm going to get that out there. So now we can begin on the figures. I also, unfortunately, this is where legality and humanity cross many times in my work, in our work. So a reduction in force like this, or a program reduction, at its very heart is a legal process. Meaning you have to have a rational basis. You have to follow all the underlying 11 collective bargaining agreements we have in the system. And so sometimes if I appear to be clinical, it is not meant to be hurtful. It is meant to be pragmatic and legal. So I have a legal obligation to do what I'm going to do and provide you a rational basis for reduction. So I'm just kind of framing how the conversation is going to go. I will likely use language that will offend somebody and call somebody a counselor. I should have called them an academic counselor or a behavioral counselor, except that is not my intent. I've been doing this a long time, and sometimes I've stuck on some old words. So if I use him here as counselor, it's not to be disrespectful. It's just because that's generally what I had called him in my career. So I wanted to frame that up, and then I'll begin. So I'm going to take you back to where it all started. So in July, I gave a budget presentation when the budget was adopted for the 2023-24 fiscal year. In that budget, I make a projection on where the fund balance is going to end. And the fund balance is basically how much money you have in the bank at the end of the year. That's when it's most commonly measured. And it's mostly cash, but not always. So for the most part, that when we talk about fund balance, it's basically how much money you have in the bank at the end of the fiscal period. There has never been in my career also the right amount of fund balance. My friends sometimes in labor want us to run a fund balance of 2 or 3%. My financial folks at GFOA want us to run 16% of the total expenditures. The bond rating agencies like 10 and 12. So when we talk about fund balance, I've yet to have an agreeable amount, agreeable number, but board has a policy with a minimum of 5%. That's the minimum. And then after that, we can make adjustments financially. So just explaining fund balance. So in this case, what was projected in July, and I'll show you, is coming to fruition. So again, there have been calls I've heard historically about reductions that have not occurred. Reductions are too painful for it to not to occur because there's so much emotion and intellect and effort that goes behind this work, and you can see the ripple to the organization. So I want you to know that when this happens, it's not taken lightly by anybody. So as we begin the year, student enrollment was below projection, so I over-projected enrollment. I should have projected it in a further decline. I did not, as it continues to decline. So there was a $2 million error, or not an error, yeah, $2 million error in revenue. Then we had unbudgeted Title I carryover at the end of the fiscal year. The $2.861 million, as you see in the third line, that's how much money we have saved thus far through attrition and then not filling or executing contracts that we may have had an opportunity to execute. So those are mid-year savings that will trickle or go in right into 24-25 as we get there. We had additional state revenue mid-year. It will not come until August, so it hasn't hit our coffers yet. So the legislature occasionally surprises us, given the fact that districts are facing budget reductions all over the state. My colleague in North Shore just finished another $27 million reduction after a $20 million reduction in North Shore. And so there's $47 million there in that district over a 2-year period. So whether it be East or Western Washington, the reductions are large and they're driven by enrollment decline and inflation. And so what the legislature did, which, as I said, they surprise me every year, they give mid-year money. And usually they only give mid-year money when they know districts are short on cash. And so I'll talk a little bit and show you where our cash position is, but the legislature surprised us and gave us some money, which again goes into additional savings that we do not have to reduce going forward. So as of right now, all the information before me and my years of experience, I believe that we should end the year at about a $12.5 million fund balance. That's 12.58. There are a few unknowns that I'm always publicly about. I call those wild cards. We have an application in for safety net funding for just under $1.8 million. However, Yakima historically has not received a large amount of safety net funding, so we budget that very conservatively. That could help, but that will add, again, to the fund balance. But again, that is one of the largest unknowns, I think, financially right now, but I wanted to make sure you all knew that. Let's talk about student FTE. That is Yakima's historic basic ed FTE. Alternative learning is not on this slide because it is in the board letter. So for those of you following along, there should be 4 items on the public agenda. One would be the board resolution that Director Walker put on the floor earlier. One would be an action letter, which provides detail in a written and narrative form on the reductions and why. There's also a PowerPoint presentation, and then there's a short board letter that basically triggers the action. So there are 4 items. If you'd like to research those or pull them up, they're online now. You can do that. Or if you'd like to review them, you can do that as well. So as you can see from our historical enrollment, the district has been in steady decline since 2017-18, which is our peak year. Now, I do want to talk about the timing of those years. So this is in table form. Now, what this table shows is our peak enrollment at 2017-18 at 16,233 students. We had, at that point in time, 1,074 certificated staff and 685 classified staff. Now that column to the far right is total staff per 1,000 students. So this is a measure that's commonly used to normalize large data sets. So you take it by 100 or by 1,000. And so when you take it by 1,000, which is historically how school districts were funded before there was a new model, we were funded on per 1,000 students. You can see in 2017-18, we had 108.4, that's certificated and classified staff per 1,000 students. The current fiscal year in 23-24 in the adopted budget, we have 134.18 staff members per 1,000. The proposed reductions before the board this evening would take that down to 125.3. Now, if you do the math back to 17-18 levels, that would still be another 250. We have 250 staff more than we had in 2017-18 currently on the rolls. So when you look at historically, even after the reduction, we're still above the 2017-18 levels. So there was an 11.4% reduction in enrollment, a 9% increase in certificated staffing, and an 18% increase in classified staffing. And you want to know why? Well, let's look at those years. If you look at fiscal years 16, 17, 18, and 19, what happened in the state in those years in education? McCleary, right? Large cash influx around the state, billions of dollars in K-12. Redoing salary schedules, blowing up contracts for all different types of things. And then we had, and I say we, the royal we in K-12, we had 1 year of normal operations. We had 19-20. And then in 2021, what happened? March, pandemic. So we went from the McCleary ruling, March of 20. March of 20. It's fiscal year 2021, sorry. Apologies. March of 20 is when the pandemic hit. Following that, as you all know what occurred statewide, we had some of the most lengthy student lockdowns in the United States. We had remote learning for a very long time, and we all went through the hybrid and all the conflict that occurred there. The other disrupting event was then we had one-time federal COVID-19 relief money, ESSER funds. ESSER funds were talked about earlier. Now, Yakima was a recipient of a significant amount of ESSER funding because the funding was pushed out through Title I formulas at the federal level. So if you were a high poverty district, such as Yakima, you received more ESSER funds than a wealthier district. These funds have to be fully expended by September 1st of 2024. So when we talked about ESSER funds earlier, the window to use those is about ready to close. So ESSER funds could not be used next fiscal year to help us out of our budget issues. The funds would have to be obligated or expended by September 1st, 2024. So if there was a belief that ESSER funds could be used to stave off the budget reductions before us, or stove off the budget reductions, sorry, that isn't correct. The funds have to be obligated and expended by September 1st of 24. Linked in that table is a study from Stanford. It talks about where the kids have gone from public education, and they've made a huge amount of alternative decisions. Some we've retained and some have left. The superintendent talked about 47,000 or so statewide.
So I would simply add, Jake, and thank you for going through each year by year. I would add that during that pandemic period, you may recall that Yakima School District was virtually the only district in the area that did not have any reductions. In fact, we were also the district that distributed the most meals across the state as compared to any other district. So there was a very intentional focus on maintaining positions during a time that was a once in a century moment. And again, I think it's really important to acknowledge that and the decision and support of the board at such a critical time in the history of our country in going through those issues. And then go ahead, back to you.
That is the graphical representation of the historical, classified, and certificated staffing levels over the last decade. So it just pulls from that chart just so there was a graphical representation for people so they could use it later if they wanted to read. So let's recap. BA enrollment has declined 11.4% since 17-18. Based on the 24-25 projections, enrollment will be down 1,850. That is equivalent to losing Zilla and Union Gap school districts. So that's two small districts in the valley, smaller districts in the valley. Our enrollment decrease is equivalent approximately to both their enrollments. Staffing levels from 17-18 increased by 9, as we talked about, and 18.18 for classified staff. And then the current proposed reduction takes the staffing levels to 125.3, which is still 249 staff greater than the 17-18 levels that the district ran on historically. What happens if there's no reduction this evening and the board decides not to take program reductions? That graph is fairly simple. It is meant to be. If there are no reductions or not reductions this evening of a significant amount, the district will become insolvent next fiscal year. But we have a deficit greater currently than our fund balance, which means we have, if we adopt a budget with no spending cuts, we would be in binding conditions of receivership as well, which is why we're here making these tough decisions and trying to manage the finances. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what happens if there's no action. We deplete our reserves to zero, and then we would then have to work with the state on a plan. The proposed reductions for 24-25, and here's a summary. So the carry forward reductions we talked about, we use carry forward or attrition kind of interchangeably, but those are mid-year reductions we've taken already. MSOCs. So MSOC is a state acronym for material supplies and operating costs. It used to be called NERCs, non-employee related costs. I know the state has great acronyms. We reduced those, simply put, those are material supplies, purchase services, capital outlay. So those are expenses outside of personnel. Those are reduced by just under $1.5 million, 1.4. So the proposed action before the board this evening is 14.669 million and total estimated reductions of 18.97804.
Mr. Cooper, and the board does not need to take action on the entire portion. It's the 14,669,000.
Yes. So the board will be taking action on the layoff of the positions. The other items, since there were attrition, that was done and did not require the action of the board of directors. And then the reductions for MSOC, so supplies and materials, also does not require board action. Let's talk about the contractual reductions. We have many contracts with ESD 105 that serve our community and the district. We combed through those and weaned those down by 214,000. We have the Inuit group for PBIS. They have been in place for 4 or 5 years. We're going to move on from that contract, and then I won't belabor every item by item. Kinderhofen, that was a reduction to a contractual service, and then we hired more of our own staff. So we chose to forego a contractual service for labor. That was a twofold benefit. A, we got our own employees, and B, we had a cost savings above contract. So there's the savings from hiring our own folks and moving away from the Kinderhofen agreement. The other reduction would be the MSOC, but that's just broad. Those are broad, small supply reductions across the whole budget, so that's why they're lumped in together for 200,000. And is there any questions on the contractual? So this is 23-24. These are executed to date. So we talked about attrition. Superintendent talked about our administrative reductions in the current fiscal year. You can see those are laid out. As we move through this, we have a mixture of certificated and classified staff in the school district. Approximately statewide, 60% of staff statewide are certificated and 40% are classified. It varies by a few percentage as you move around the state, but that's roughly the breakout. FTE on these sheets is certificated staff, and hours, that's hours per day for classified, because classified staff all have different calendars and work years, so their FTE is different than a teacher has a standard work year and a standard calculation for an FTE. So the hours per day will eventually be calculated to FTE, and they'll be on the on the resolution. They are on the resolution, just so you understand the wayfinding on the sheet. Anything? Okay. So as you can see on the executed program reductions, there are 5 administrative staff, and then a listing of, these are all attrition. So these folks moved on and found other positions for the most part. So they were mid-year. And so we have a few OSG positions, 8 hours a day. So if you see 8-hour classified, that would be a 1.0 position for the most part. And then custodians, I'm going to touch on custodians. As openings have come open on custodial staff, we've used attrition instead of reduction in force to lower custodial staff. And then we have some paratime there that was reduced upon attrition. And then the other, the following reduction as we go into, so there's YEA, there was a resignation, and that position was not filled. And same with the support specialist and third or secretarial staff you see on the YEOP. And this YMA was the same. Those are unfilled positions. They came to open. We worked with Superintendent Murrieta on finding alternative ways to service the district. And that brings us to 6 FT and 158 hours a day, 2.8 million. Questions from the board? Okay. Before you now is the proposed program reductions for 2024-25. Again, they'll be sorted similarly with certificated staff FTE in that left column closest to the descriptor, and then the hours per day for classified. You may want to know why the detail is disclosed in this manner. So to provide a rational basis and enough information for the board and the community, you need to provide an estimate of the savings, the approximate FTE, and then a brief description, which is what we've done here. We try our best not to name people specifically, but there are times on occasion where a person may have a singular position, so it becomes kind of impossible to make it not known. So we do apologize for those one-offs, but it's a very difficult situation to not get yourself into, given the standards. So assistant superintendent, we talked about. So there's 2 assistant superintendent reductions over 2 years. We have 10 assistant principal reductions for 1.9 million. 2 additional directors at central services for 413. An OSG at central services. And you can see where possible, we put the number of positions. So for example, interpreter 1 of 2, childcare coordinator, EIL assessment specialist, community health worker, family support specialist, health assistant, transition specialist, psych interns, guidance specialist, social emotional specialist, migrant student advocate, and family liaison. All those positions are set for reduction, and their estimated costs are provided to the right. Are there any questions? Yeah. The second page of the document provides additional detail. I would like to make, on the paras in particular, the para reduction is a budgetary reduction only, as there are more open positions than there are reductions system-wide. So that would be a reduction on paper, not an actual position. So on the para reduction, it is a reduction of authorized positions in budget, not an actual reduction of position. If that makes sense. Does that? Okay. The major reductions for certificated staff are the academic specialist positions across K-12. The increase in class size allocation for 12. So I want to highlight the 412. So we are incentivized and have maintained our class sizes K3. So K3, the state has a 17-to-1 target. That is not 17-to-1 of actual classroom, because you also get to add up upon that your additional certificated staff that serve kids outside of the classroom. So your librarians that are providing direct service to kids, your specialists, music, PE, music and PE in particular, and then a portion of your special education staff. So even though the calculated target is 17, the actual ratio is around 19 and a half by the time you get credit for all the positions outside of the actual calculation. So that results in 20 fewer positions for YA across the district. We have TOSA and SES assessment and counseling detailed for 5 certificated staff members. Counselors, I want to talk about those a little bit. There were 2 additional PBIS counselors that were hired out of ESSER funds. Then they moved to the local levy this cycle. So those are 2 of those 5 counselor reductions. Those were additional ESSER funded counselors that have migrated from ESSER onto the local levy. And those are part of the 2 of the 5 reductions. One high school counselor out of Davis and Eisenhower. A merger of Stanton, Wyville, and Open Doors. So this is a consolidation of location and some programming. It does result in a savings of approximately 6 certificated staff members, given the combination of programming. There's also savings on the support staff side as well. So you can see also slated was 1 ELD teacher. And I want to talk about some of those reductions. Now, some of the reductions you see of a budget like Yakima Schools is also because of where that position is funded. So we have a huge amount of categorical funds and only a very small amount of local levy funds or BEA funding. So oftentimes when we look at reductions, it can be tied to where the position is actually funded out of. So it's very difficult to reduce categorical programs. So the ELD teacher, for example, is because our grant, the TBIP grant, has not kept up with salary and benefit costs. So in that way, the grant allocation could not hold as many staff members. And so we had to do that in a few places across the system for categorical funds, where the categorical funding from the feds is not keeping up with our salary and benefit rates. And then we get into teachers of the juvenile detention. So we have a handful of teachers, I think just 5 and a half or 6. I don't want to give the wrong FTE number. They work with both the juvenile detention center and Ridgeview group home. Yep. And what we found out during our work is that state law prohibits the school district from spending money in excess of the allocation provided to each of those schools. So I'm familiar. I came from a district that had Echo Glen Juvenile Detention Center. And in that way, you were not allowed to supplement the program with your local levy funding. And so when we were doing this budget work, it became apparent that we had too many CERT staff in that program. So it was not being fully supported by the state of Washington. We have to reduce those staff to be compliant. And then we get into our YEOP members. So 2 secretaries at one of each of the comprehensive high schools. And then you see a CTE support specialist, then the online office manager that is part of the consolidation work. And then we move into a registrar and then satellite programs and a program specialist. So when all is said and done, there's 75 and a half certificated FTE or the equivalent there's 495 hours of classified time, which is the equivalent of 48 and a half FTE classified. So let's see how it all shakes out when it comes to deductions. So this table may be a little confusing, and I've gone back and forth on how to orient it so it makes sense. But what this table shows you, so the group is the YEA on top. Okay? What that says is the proposed reductions before the board, 42% of that reduction is from YEA. YEA is currently 63% of our labor costs. So if it was perfectly pro rata, a pro rata share, YEA would have a larger reduction in this case, but it's not pro rata. In this case, as the table reads, YEA is 42% of the reduction and 62% of the labor expense. Okay? Now you're going to see where other units where the ratio is different. So let's Protex as an example. We went through Protex, and there was quite a bit of reduction in that group. As you can see, they're 10% of the reduction and only 4% of the current labor. The same for YPA, 10% of the total budget reduction before, and then just under 5% of the total labor costs. So they're a 2-for-1. So as a pro rata share, they are taking double the reduction as a percentage of their labor group. Admin, currently 8% of the total reduction, 3% of the total labor. So almost threefold as a pro rata. MSOCs, as I talked about, don't have a percentage of labor. They're not labor. And then the same thing for YUOP. They're very close when we look at it from a pro rata or proportional share basis. They're 5.4% of the reduction, 4.7% of the labor. YABs, 2.8 and 3.5. Our OSG, 1.8 and 1.7. And YMA accordingly. And then the superintendent's percent of reduction, 1.6, total percent of labor, 0.9. So what that chart is meant to show you is when we look at the reductions and we look at the percentage of the labor, that how it would look if it was perfectly prorated. So if the reductions are perfectly prorated, YEA would have another $3 or $4 million to get to that 60%. That is not how those reductions look because they're spread across the other bargaining units. Or taking out the contractual services. You also note there are a few units that aren't up here. Transportation, no reductions in transportation. We've been trying to hire bus drivers my whole career. You also see food services absent. Self-funded program, federally funded, community eligibility, also not on the reduction list. So those two units are absent because they are either categorically funded or they're in a place where we have never been fully staffed. Is there any questions on the table? So, estimated increase, expenses or loss of revenue, 18.7. Increase in revenue for 24-25 are savings. We'll get to how this looks when it's laid out in the chart. Just bear with me. Estimated ending fund balance if the reductions are adopted of 14.8 million or just at 5%. And then I know this chart is small, I apologize, but we started with 23-24. We went through all that detail, and then here is where I believe 24 and 25 will. Okay? These are all the drivers that I know as of today. So I'll take you through them. Cost of the negotiated increases. So 0.5% for YEA, above IPD, other negotiated increases, that all comes out of the local levy. So the negotiated increases that we know about to date are 1.2 million. That next number is 3.2 million. 3.2 million is the local cost to fund 3.7% IPD for every employee. The state gives us about 2/3 to 55% of the cost to fund the COLA for everybody because we have a huge amount of federally funded employees. And so every federally funded employee or locally funded employee does not receive a cost of living adjustment from the state of Washington. That all has to come out of our bottom line, all out of the local levy dollars. So even with the COLA like that, there's still an unfunded district cost of 3.2 million. 1.5 million in inflation. So last cycle, our insurance budget went up by $300,000 for our liability insurance. We believe we're going to still have double-digit increases in our insurance. So I conservatively estimated on a budget of $300 million, $1.5 million in inflation for supplies and materials. So very conservative. And then we talk about the estimated carry forward deficit. So 23-24, we started with 14.4 million. We chipped away at it all year long with attrition. We're still left with a deficit from prior year of 11.3 million. I'm projecting additional enrollment decline. So we already took partial credit for the enrollment decline in 23-24. I don't want to count that twice. So I'm taking the additional 100 kids or so and adding it on here for more reduction. So altogether, increased costs or loss of revenue, we're at 18.7 million. Okay, now we'll get to the black, the good news. Okay. Local levy. Local levy is collected on a calendar year basis. We operate on a fiscal year basis of September 1st to August 31st. So the local levy that was just passed had nearly a $5 million increase from one calendar year levy to the next, but we only get half of that this year. We get to collect the first half of the calendar. We don't get to collect the full. So it'll take 2 full years for that increase to roll into the school district. The proposed program reductions before the board, as we talked about and went over, is that just under 14.7, so 14,669. The reductions that we outlined for MSOC's contractual services, you can see there, 1447. Now, the legislature also does a few things, and I want to talk about them a little bit. So there's additional funds for the physical, social, emotional support for 1.447. That's the second year that was meant to be phased in by the legislature. You saw on the reduction list there was counselors being reduced. I want you to know that before we entertain this exercise, we were already 30 full units, 30 full staff members above where the state, even with this funding, because it is, remember, it's safety, security, it's our nursing staff, so and our counseling staff. So as we have, a very healthy security and nursing support system and our counseling staff, we more than make are ahead of the state allocation. I just want to put it on the table. MSOC. So the MSOC in this case is positive funding from the legislature, so they increased the MSOC amount. And then the prototypical school model. So during the legislative session, they were, I don't know, those are both 304,000, which is odd, but that's the way they calculated. 394 on that top one. That were the additional staffing units for the conversation around paras. So originally the conversation in the legislature started around paras and their pay rate, etc. The legislature decided after much debate to go and increase the number of paras they would fund us for. And they actually made it a broader category for called instructional aid or instructional support. That was positive revenue. And then transportation, that is an estimate on transportation. So I took our current pro rata share of the state transportation funding formula, and there's $76 million obligated across the fiscal year. No district will know that final number until they run it through their magic formula box here at the end of August. That takes us into a little over $21 million in positive revenue or savings. Provides a surplus of $2.2 million to get that fund balance just right over 5% at 14.8 million. And that is the result of the fund balance, graphically speaking, following the proposed program reductions. The goal, I always tell folks that my goal as your CFO is to be as boring and predictable as possible. And so the goal is to stabilize the finances and operations of the school district and become boring and predictable again for our employees and our students. So, questions?
Any questions or comments from the board for Mr. Cooper?
I have a question. I appreciate that you are
maintaining a 5% fund balance, and that's board policy. If the board approved reducing that fund balance percentage to some amount, I don't know what that would be, 3% or 4%, what would that look like for the district to go back and look at those reductions again?
Would it change the reduction amounts? Each percent's roughly 3 million. Put it in perspective. Right now, the way our fund balance is, if we looked at cash flow, at 5% here in Yakima, we're getting pretty close to having liquidity problems in the spring. We've talked about during the board meeting, and in part that's because the way we are funded is we have a huge amount of reimbursement basis grants, and so when we outlay cash, then it takes us 60 days to get it back. And so I would not recommend operating a system such as Yakima or a district this size below 5% fund balance at a minimum. You can do it, but then you will be monitoring your cash flow day by day by day, or have to hold accounts payable, which we sometimes have to do now. So it's not just about the total fund balance at the end of the year. As we talked about, peak, trough, peak, as the cash flow goes, it's the trough period that where districts run into liquidity problems. The state has also changed how they give us money from the apportionment statement, the apportionment system. And so districts were also having cash flow problems starting in August because we're not getting our full apportionment until later. So I would not recommend that from a financial or professional standpoint. Again, to put it in perspective, every 1% is 3 million.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I appreciate the presentation, the thorough presentation of this information. And I also appreciate the fact that you as our CFO and administrative staff of the district have been very intentional about scrubbing the budget and making sure that these reductions really need to happen in order to meet our obligation of being able to educate all the students in the district and ensuring that they are all safe when they're in our school buildings and that they're fed, they receive the nourishment that they need through our food services folks. And it's a real balancing act. And over the years, I've come to realize what a clever person a CFO is, that they can keep all the plates spinning on the sticks and still be able to keep things running. So thank you, Jake.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. We have a motion and a second to approve the RIF 0.423.24 reduction in force for 24-25. Do we have any other comment or question from the board?
I just want to address the difficult situation that we're facing as a district, and it's important to recognize that as we've approached this challenge, we started with administrative cuts. We've made tough decisions at every level with the intention of minimizing impact on our students as much as possible. The situation is tough. It's not easy for any of us. I've served as a board member for almost a decade, and this has been one of the hardest things that I've had to be a part of. The steps that we've taken have been guided by the principle of doing what's best for our students, even in the face of these difficult choices. We've engaged with building leaders and explored every possible avenue and made decisions with careful consideration. Understand that emotions are running high, and assure you that all of the comments and concerns that are shared today are heard, and we value you coming here to share those perspectives. Thank you for your understanding and hope for your support as we navigate these difficult decisions.
Thank you. I think that reflects the opinion of most of the board or all of the board that we have struggled deeply with this. There's no one here that wants to ever see anybody be afraid of losing a job or losing a salary or losing their place. Part of us, of who we are, sometimes is what our job is. It's part of our identity, and so there's a lot of fear and a lot of concern when we have to make those tough decisions. But if we don't make appropriate financial decisions, then nobody is going to survive this. So we appreciate your patience and we appreciate your being here, and we appreciate the hard work of Mr. Cooper. Thank you. Okay.
I just want to add, first off, thank you, Vice President Villanueva. I think you articulated my thoughts quite well. I also appreciate, Jake, the concept that there are so many different ways to approach budgeting. Looking at the trending decline since I joined the board, I think it's very safe to say that we should have been out in front of this earlier. And that isn't truly meant as a critique. That is truly meant as an observation, and it reflects on the philosophy of budgeting. And I think we'll be able to address it as we go forward. We do have a declining birth rate, but we also have census data that shows that our population within our district boundaries is actually growing. So we have some serious introspection to do as a district to really understand why parents are choosing alternate methods of education and how that contributes to our declining enrollment, because it certainly impacts our staff and it impacts our students down the road. I think that there's a lot of truth to the idea of the differences of philosophy. I don't suspect that this organization could have approached it with any particular philosophy and not have found ourselves in a difficult position. But I do look forward to making sure that is part of the conversation going forward.
Thank you. And just one other clarification. When Mr. Kavanaugh pointed something out, which was that we knew that we were seeing declining enrollments, a trend over time, yet we were still adding staff or retaining staff. But I think, as I recall, we had a pandemic. And one of the results of that pandemic is students lost a lot of ground academically. We had high school students reporting to us that their friends need help, that we needed support services for our students. So part of that decision to maintain some staffing levels at high levels had to do with academic recovery. We want our students doing well, and had to do with emotional and mental health recovery, that we were committed as a district and as a board that we wanted our students to have access to mental health so that they could heal from the difficulty of those difficult years and reestablish themselves in school. So I think there was a calculation made to make sure that we take care of that. And I think we need to not forget that in the process. Thank you.
I do want to make a comment as well. So, I've been on the board for about 20 years, and this is the most difficult decision that we're making. And all of my 20 years, as Director Villanueva mentioned, this particular decision is going to affect me personally. And so that's why it even makes it more difficult. And therefore, I will abstain from this vote because of that. But I do appreciate all the work that Jake did and our superintendent. And for all you guys being here today, you guys do outstanding work in the district. And it is a difficult day today to know that the cuts are coming. And that's something that we really need to do to establish financial stability and security in our district for the future, right? And making those difficult decisions now. While they're difficult, they're going to help us to establish that in the future. So again, I just want to apprise the board that I will be, this decision is impacting me very personally, and it's a difficult one as well. And I will abstain from this vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comment or question from the board? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Barb, would you call the roll, please?
Director Beckett?
Aye.
Director Navarro Jr.,
I abstain.
Director Rice,
Aye.
Vice President Villanueva. Aye. President Walker.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0 to 1.
Thank you. We've now arrived at the second opportunity for public comment. Are there any signups for public comment? Excuse me, I believe you've had an opportunity to comment. I believe you can have another. Okay. Thanks for clarifying for me. Okay, we will hear again from Mr. Clark. Thank you.
So just a few comments. I'm interested in these different theories of when to make budget cuts. And I was just wondering, John, before you leave, were we ever made aware that they were pursuing this strategy of maintaining supports for as long as they could and steering toward the iceberg? No. Was the board ever made aware of that? Okay, my point is, was this a plan or was this a total screw up? It sounds like it's a screw up. Second, the point about the COVID impacted kids. The kids who are most impacted by COVID are now in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade because they missed majority of their kindergarten or 1st grade or 2nd grade year. Do you think those kids have had more support than their predecessors or the kids who come behind them? They have not. 2 years ago, for the last 2 years, we took all of the lap paras and we put them into kindergarten primarily. And they've been there and they were pulled out of the other classrooms. So the kids who needed the most help actually got less support. Thank you.
Now we have Dr. DeWitt.
Having looked at the agenda and knowing what was coming today for over a week, we had many members come here today who are here because they wanted to know whether or not they had a job tomorrow. The dog and pony show that went on for the last 2 hours to avoid that conversation, to tell our teachers if they're going to work next year, has been an embarrassment of leadership and a failure of the balls it takes to run a district this large. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Now we have a policy governance item, and we finally have arrived with our very patient students here. They are going to present the student voice policy, which they have spent countless hours, months preparing. We'll take a break so people can leave. Okay, welcome back. We'll reconvene so we can hear from our students who would wish to present the first reading of our student voice policy.
Good afternoon, and thank you, members of the board, superintendent, cabinet, and audience members who decided to stay. We're here today to present our student voice policy, and before we get into our presentation, I would just like to say that this team and the other team members have put in an incredible amount of work in this policy for the last year and 9 months. We've also seen an incredible amount of support from our school district, so we thank you for that, and thank you for supporting student voice. And with that, we'll get into our presentation, and after our presentation, we'll ask if there's any specific spots on our policy that you'd like us to read, and we'll ask if you have any questions about it. And then we will come back on April 8th for a vote. Thank you. So this presentation is just a brief history and process of what we've gone through with our policy, who we've talked to really make sure this is a real student voice policy that brings out authentic voices.
Hello. I just also want to say Valeria Garza to anybody who doesn't know me. I have been a part of this work since my freshman year. Before I begin presenting this slide, I just want to address that we knew that today was going to be a day where we would have a bigger audience than we normally would when presenting in a school board meeting. Personally, we all decided together that we wanted to have it today of all days because one, we wanted to have the audience of not just school board members, not just teachers, and not just a live stream, which we know that parents and other students who have contacted me also let me know that they're a part of. This is something that we've been working on for a very long time. Student voice needs to be the center of our education. It needs to be the forefront of where we begin as a community, building community through education. That is the quote that we are working by, living towards, and that's what we strive to be. And the first step to get there is to engage students and realize that we are a part of this process. We have to be a part of this process in order to move forward. So as I begin with student voice policy origins, our priorities, we collected this data through our SSAC, which is a smaller or a bigger group of students who have been able to access this policy, and they were the forefront of our opinions and their help with the definitions and just accessing the data. So as you can see, access and affordability, modern technology, influence decisions, deeper individualization, due process, free expression, positive school climate, diversity and inclusion, and civic participation. Diversity and inclusion, as you can see, makes up most of the pie, makes up most of the circle. That diversity and inclusion, not just talking about minority inclusion, but just as a group of students who we know that our diversity and being included into the process of school board presentation or being able to incorporate our opinion into having our seat at the table, that is where we defined our definition. Okay. My name is Andreas. And I'm glad that those who chose to stay are here. But thank you. On July 2022, we did studying reports, articles, and exemplar policies, and then started kind of writing our very first draft of what the student policy possibly was going to look like. It was a very long process, and overall, even when we were beginning this, we wanted to make sure that we were trying to get as much as the input that we were given to begin with, and also what we were with the examples that we had as well to kind of see what other policies were kind of showing versus what ours was going to show.
So one of the foundational beliefs that our team has that really pushed this policy forward was that the idea that if 4 students wrote a policy that was meant to represent 16,000, that was not an authentic student voice policy. We wanted to get the representation of as many students as possible into our policy. And so that's what led us to present to so many students. We presented to all 4 of our middle schools, either in person, tabling at lunches, or online and having them fill out surveys and watching videos. So we have Franklin Middle School, Washington Middle School, Lewis and Clark Middle School, and Wilson Middle School.
And our feedback presentations to Eisenhower and to high school students, beginning with Eisenhower, Davis, Yakima Online, and YB Tech. We had the discussion too prior that we couldn't just incorporate our biggest schools like Eisenhower and Davis, but including Yakima Online and YB Tech students was also a big one of our biggest just incorporations as to getting opinions and hearing back from our policy, because like we said, we wanted to include every student and being able to access the students who aren't on campus every day or even in person. Those students, including online students, also deserve to have a say in their education. And then our feedback presentations to YSD staff, this included Davis High School, Eisenhower, YB Tech, and then the general district staff. Of course, we wanted to make sure that we had equal representation, because even though this is a student voice policy, we wanted to hear the staff input on it to begin with. So Ezra had presented to Davis staff, and then Valeria and Luano presented to Eisenhower staff. So overall, this process, we really tried to make sure that we were getting opinions from everywhere and making sure that we were having all of the feedback so that when we were writing this policy, we knew exactly maybe what teachers felt, staff felt that was important to probably put into this policy.
We also wanted to get the perspectives of our community members. So we presented to the Downtown Rotary Club, YSD Pi Partners in Education, ESD 105 superintendents, and we also had the opportunity to present at the WASA AWSP Spokane Conference, as well as the WASDA Conference. This last slide here just shows some of the feedback that we've collected from some of our surveys that we've handed out after we present. This is based on 610 and 620 responses between the periods of January and May 2023. And we estimate that we've actually presented the policy to over 1,200 stakeholders. These are over 600 responses that we've received that show overwhelming support. The first one for student voice, specifically 88.5%, and then 82.2% supported the draft that we presented to them, which has now included their feedback. So I imagine the number will be even higher. Thank you. And at this point, every member at this table has seen this policy at least once. But now it is updated as our final draft. And so we want to ask if there are any specific sections that you'd like us to read to you. And after that, we'll take any questions.
Any comments from the board? I would suggest we've all had opportunity to provide individual input on the policy already. And this is a first reading, so we can take what's here and take it home with us and give it a final look over, and then we'll vote on it at the next meeting. But I'm not sure. Does anybody have any specific questions right now?
I just have a comment. There's a document I found which is very interesting. You might want to take a look at it. It's by the Center for American Progress, evaluating student voice in education. And they have a continuum of student voice, starting from expression to consultation, participation, partnership, activism, and leadership. So those some good, interesting information that you might want to take a look at. And I can share this with you after the meeting. Something that, for me, kind of opened my eyes to student voice, and perhaps it looks like you might be getting into more like leadership as well, right? And activism and creating change in the district. So I just wanted to mention that. It's a good document, good resource that perhaps you might want to have a review as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Navarro.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
I just have a comment. I want to commend all of you, and I'm assuming that you'll pass it on to the others who had to leave. This is a very impressive piece of work for, I know adults that couldn't come up with this kind of depth in a policy. And for high school students to be able to do that is very impressive. And I know I was in that workshop that you presented at the WASDA conference, and there was a lot of energy from other students in the room, from other districts in our state, for the kind of work that you all are doing here in Yakima. So I just wanted to thank you for, I know it's been a long slog pulling this together. I want to thank you for your dedication and making sure that the product that you have brought to us is a quality product and one that will last for years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other? Dr. Green?
Just a quick comment from me. I just want to commend you all as well for all of the work that you've done. It's really exciting for me to see as a community member, someone who's been in Yakima my whole life, and someone who's been in your shoes at one point too. very excited and pleased that you feel safe and empowered to speak up in the way that you have through this policy, and that voice will continue to be heard after you move on and graduate and do other things. Other students behind you will continue to benefit from this work. So I'm really excited to see this come through to this point, and just want to congratulate you all for all the work that you've done here. Thank you so much.
Just want to share how proud I am of each of you. You're just such a great example of leadership and taking charge of your education, right? There's a saying that if you don't have a seat at the table, then you should bring a folding chair. And you truly have brought a folding chair and set it up. And now you know how things work. And it's just wonderful to have you pass on that knowledge to others, and the exceptional amount of effort to engage so many different people across, not only in our district, but outside of our district, to make this policy as solid as it could be is truly inspiring. I do want to call out, though, I don't think, did you present actually to our principals group? You didn't, but you did present to different staff with the principal present, correct? Excellent. I just want to make sure that that was acknowledged. And I think similarly, did you extend an invitation to our Teachers Association, their executive board, to present? Yeah. It was declined, but you were able to present in buildings where you had membership then involved as well. Right. So I think it's important to recognize just the amount of depth of reaching out to as many people as possible, and being very cognizant of how important it is to do that. So again, thank you for setting the bar so high. One of my favorite just last stories was when, can't believe you're seniors already, a couple of you are seniors already. And I just remember them presenting, I believe it was at a business leaders meeting here in our district, in this room, and having somebody read, you remember this, where they were reading the policy, and they made the statement, well, yeah, this is great, but what did they say about kids? We just, it would be great if students would have written this. And, this sounds just so adult and at this college level. And I turned to our team and I said, can you tell them who wrote this? And they're like, we did. Can you tell them what grade you're in? Sophomores, right? So just again, elevating that bar and resetting the expectation that people have of what you can do is something that's going to resonate well past your tenure here. So you really have accomplished something inspiring, and it is now up to all of us and the people that come now next to stand up on your shoulders and then move forward and carry out additional policies, but assure that we are living up to the responsibility of policy governance, and you figured out how to do that in an amazing way. And I just treasure the time that we've had together, even though it was so challenging at times. Thank you for pushing me, for pushing our system.
Thank you so much. Okay. We'll see you at the next meeting for the final vote. Okay, next up we have our legal representative, Mr. No, presenting a rental or lease of district real property policy.
Thank you. Good evening, board. This is intended to be a first reading of this policy for your consideration. It's a policy that would allow us to rent or lease surplus space if we ever have a situation where we would want to do that. The statute requires that the board pass a policy in order to do that. If the policy is not in place, we would not be able to do that. This policy is based on the laws de model policy. It also has a provision in it which is consistent with state law that in the event we ever want to lease property, we have to provide a 45-day notice window to the public, basically offering the property at the going market rate. So we're asking you to consider it today for a first reading, and it'll likely come on the next board meeting for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Mr. No at this time? Okay, we'll read through it again and be ready for it at the next meeting. Thank you. Last up, in this section, we have the Global End Statement, goal number 2, with Omar Santai. There he is.
Thank you. As Omar approaches, I just remind the board that Omar did present most recently in February, yes, Omar? On the global end statement goal 2. At that time, the data had not been updated, and this is to move us into the decoupled share of goal number 2, which will now occur during this time on a yearly basis. So this gets us into the rotation of having goal number 2 presented around the end of March, beginning of April timeframe. Thank you for coming here this evening and presenting for us, Mr. Santoy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Omar Santoy, Executive Director of Student Services. And that presentation was done in December with a board retreat presentation as well. So I'm just thankful for the opportunity to follow up and update from my December presentation on goal number 2. You have received the full slide deck for review, and today I'll be sharing a few slides with updated information. So to just get started, as you know, the strategic plan calls out 5 aspirational goals for our district. These goals are our community commitments that we will meet by 2026. This is found in our global end statement as a part of policy 1000.1.0. Today we will be specifically focusing on goal number 2. Thank you. So looking at goal number 2, we center on all students empowered, connected, supported, resilient, and engaged. When broken down, we call out that all students will develop habits and behaviors that elevate student voice, resilience, and personal ownership in a safe, caring, and supportive environment. When interpreting this goal, we call out all students means all students, no exceptions. Habits and behaviors of student voice, resilience, and personal ownership fall within the social, emotional, and behavioral domain. Regular attendance is an example of taking personal ownership under this goal. A safe, caring, and supportive environment is defined as one in which a student feels connected to at least one caring adult and their peers. Now that we've cleared up that interpretation, when evaluating progress toward this goal, today you will be looking at updated data from OSPI, which measures regular attendance using their formula. Also data from our Skyward information system, which measures daily average attendance, and that is by period, just a reminder. Also, we will be sharing, I will be sharing with you the CEE and Healthy Youth Survey data, as we do have some updated numbers. When using those measures, we do see continued progress in this goal. So in regard to attendance, our community commitment calls out at least 19 out of every 20 students, or 95%, will attend at least 171 days out of 180 days per school year. The baseline for this in 2019 was 10 out of every 20 students, or 50%. I know that the board is looking at this community commitment and considering a slight adjustment to include all students, not just those who meet the 180-day criteria. So with that, the benchmarks that you can see below have not changed and won't change since that December presentation, just because that community commitment specifically calls out the 180-day criteria. But I do have, however, updated OSPA or OSPI regular attendance data, and that is finalized now. In December, we had some preliminary numbers at 63%. And those numbers did finalize at 63.5%. And so just calling attention to this graph. When looking at the blue line, in December, I reported that 63 was the preliminary number, but you can see for 22-23, We do see that number at 63.5%, which is an increase of 7.4%. So that's movement in the right direction. And when you look at the orange line, that is our skyward average daily average attendance rate. And our year-to-date measure is maintaining at about 89%, so slightly higher than where we finished last year in 22-23. So again, a slight increase, which is good news. And if we look at slide 11, this is in regard to the OSPI regular attendance data, and it indicates that almost all race ethnicity groups had an increase from 21-22 to 22-23, with the exception of our Asian students, who dipped from 85.7 to 80%. However, they do still remain a group that has the highest attendance rate in the district. It's nice to see growth coming from almost all of the groups and not just heavy in one particular group over any other. And when assessing the second part of goal number 2, with our students being connected, supported within the district, our community commitment is at least 19 out of every 20 students would agree or strongly agree to the questions, I feel safe at school, and I feel connected to other students and adults at school. Our baseline in 2019 for this goal was 16 out of every 20 students met the criteria for feeling safe. And at that time, there was no baseline for students feeling connected. On slide 12, you will see that data that was presented in December. And then on slide 13, if you toggle between the two, you will see our 2023 end of year data as a comparison. So if you toggle between the two slides, you will see that every measure increased with the exception of the elementary response to the statement, in this school, there's at least one adult who knows and cares about me. That's the only measure. We did see a slight dip from 75% to 70%, but all other measures showed growth, as you can see in the highlighted section on slide 13. Another thing to note, back in December, when looking at, most students are respectful of others in this school. I know that at that time the board saw these numbers and it was alarming to see our elementary number being so low, and that was the 15% that was commented. I did some deeper digging, and when we see a number, like even the number that is on the 2023 data at 25%, it makes us believe that maybe 75% of the students had a negative response to that statement. And that was not the case. We actually found that 25% answer that question as almost always true. And then there was a large portion that were fairly neutral or positive, in a positive neutral stance at 65%, with only 20% having a negative response to that question. And so that was brought up in our last board meeting. When looking at the Healthy Youth Survey, and this is on slide 24, just looking at our Healthy Youth Survey data, you can see that we did backslide a little bit in regard to students feeling safe at school. And we see those numbers hovering between 74 and 77%. So we did see a slight dip in that data. And that was consistent to the data that was shared with the board from Dr. Steach. And we're seeing that kind of across the land with students feeling safe at school. And on slide 25, we did see an increase in students reporting having at least one person at school who would help them if they needed it. It's nice to see that some of these numbers grew even up to 7%, with a high being at 75% of our students answering that in a positive way. And I'm just happy to see, our growth in multiple measures. From December, I think the board had some question about, we wanted to see where these numbers fell. So we did see some increases. And with that, I would just entertain any questions from the board.
Omar, thank you for coming back with this information. I think it will bring clarity to our deliberations and discussions. But I have one question. On the dip that we see for I guess this is the healthy use survey. The dip that we see on the I feel safe at school that you called out, is that the same kind of percentage as you pointed out for the 25% of students that were almost always true at 25%, but there were 60-some% of those in the middle that had like you called it, a positive stance. Is that the same situation here?
That's not the way that I understand it. No, with the metrics for the CEE data, what we found was for elementary in particular, they were only given three options for answering. And then the middle school and high school were given a 5-point Likert scale. And so that's what shoved some of the, what I believe, that's what shoved some of the responses kind of into the center with having such a high, like a 65% representation in that answer. So the answer is that I don't believe that that's the case.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
A couple of questions on the attendance slides. On slide 5, under the 2023 benchmark, I think I may have missed what you said. There's 2 bullet points under there, under 2023 benchmark again. 7 out of 20 students met the criteria, and then 12 out of every 20 students met 90% attendance. So I'm confused what's the differences between those 2 bullets in the same benchmark here on slide 5.
Yeah, one is measuring the 95% threshold that is called out in the strategic plan, and the other is those that we're approaching at 90%.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then know that we had some discussion around, I think this question is more for Trevor, around the 2 different data points that we're using, and I may have missed something along the way, but I'm still unclear what measurement are we using to evaluate the actual goal statements. So there was a baseline set in 2019, 10 out of every 20 students. What was the data was used to determine that? I think we would stick with that data source in evaluating the 2026 commitment. And I don't have clarity on that.
I would actually like to take that. When the strategic plan, the organization that was assisting the district with putting together our new strategic plan and calling out these goals, they had used an average of an average, if that sounds complex, but they were using an average of multiple year averages to establish that baseline. And so since then, we have been measuring with the criteria that is called out of 171 out of 180 days per school year. And the measurement for those absences that would calculate those absences were calculated using by period and using our Skyward logic for that.
So it's the Skyward data that was used to set the baseline and to what was used to determine is I guess is it appropriate to say then it's the Skyward data that we'll use to evaluate
Correct.
the goal over time. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for clearing that up. Any other comments or
I
questions?
do have a question. So can you clarify interpretation bullet number 4? So I'm trying to connect that to the data on page 13. So says that a safe, caring, and supportive environment is defined as one that in which a student feels connected to at least one caring adult or peer, right? And then when we go to page 13, the connection is about 70 to 75%, but then it's a little lower in terms of feeling safe. So I don't know if that was the intention to connect those two data points. And I'm just trying to figure out how we know that we've accomplished that interpretation piece.
Yeah, this is the metric that we have been using, and so I back when the strategic plan initially called out, there was not any baseline for the connected, and so the CEE data in regard to in this school, there's at least one adult who knows and cares about me, has been the one most closely linked.
Overall comment, thank you so much for all of this data. I'm also pleased to see the increases we've seen in some of the different data points that you've shared. So I'm glad to see that we're making progress in some of these key areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. I believe we do a survey monkey on this and then report back out. Yes. Okay. So we'll expect that tomorrow. Okay. Thank you. That concludes our policy governance section of the agenda. We've now arrived at the time for executive session. I do believe there is a need for executive session for how much time?
10 minutes. The pending litigation with legal counsel.
So, do I hear a motion to move to executive session?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you all for your patience and perseverance through an interesting meeting. Meeting adjourned.